I went to a small high school in a quiet town, one of those places where everyone knew each other, the kind of place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Our school was old, built in the early 1900s, and parts of it had been abandoned for years. The top floor, especially, was sealed off after a fire decades ago. The school claimed it was unsafe, but we all knew the real reason. People whispered about a teacher who died up there, a substitute teacher who just disappeared one day. Some say she never left. I never believed the stories until the day we had a substitute teacher in my English class. Her name was Mrs. Raines. She wasn't like other subs. She didn't fumble with the lesson plan or struggle to remember our names. She walked in and knew us. She called on kids before they raised their hands, pronounced the hardest last names perfectly, and even mentioned things about us that no teacher should have known. At first, I thought she was just one of those super prepared substitutes. But then things got out of control. She had this way of staring. Not like a normal teacher. Her eyes would lock onto someone and just linger. No blinking, no expression, just watching. And when she smiled, it never fully reached her eyes. Then, about halfway through class, she called on a girl named Lauren. Lauren had been absent for the past 3 days. The whole class got quiet. We all knew why. She had gotten into a bad car accident over the weekend. We didn't know if she'd make it. Yet, Mrs. Raines looked right at her empty seat and said, "Lauren, why don't you read the next paragraph for the class?" We all turned to look. Some kids laughed nervously, thinking it was a mistake. But then we heard it. A voice. Faint, like someone struggling to breathe. "I can't." Chairs scraped against the floor as people backed away from their desk, but Mrs. Raines just stood there smiling. I felt my whole body go cold. There was no way. No way. That's when the door slammed shut, the windows rattled, and Mrs. Raines changed. Her face seemed to stretch, her skin turning gray and papery, her mouth widening in a way that no human mouth should. The air thickened with the smell of burnt hair, and the lights flickered violently. I could feel something moving, something invisible circling around us. The air crackled like static, and the whispers started, dozens of them. Voices layered over each other, some sobbing, some laughing, some choking out words that didn't make any sense. And then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The door swung open. Mrs. Raines was gone. We bolted out of that room. Nobody spoke. Nobody had to. We all knew what we just saw. The next day at school, we had our regular teacher back. When we asked about Mrs. Raines, she just frowned and said, "There's no one by that name in the substitute records." But here's the thing. Someone had written on the whiteboard before she left. 3 words, scrawled in shaky, uneven letters. Not done yet. My high school wasn't anything special. Just a regular old building with flickering hallway lights and the constant smell of cheap cafeteria food. But there was one part of the school that always felt wrong. The basement level. Most students never had a reason to go down there. It was just a storage area, full of old desks and broken chairs. But for some reason, there was one row of lockers down there, completely out of place. They were rusted, dented, and had numbers that didn't match any others in the school. No one used them. No one claimed them. Except for one. Locker number 193. It was the only one without a lock, and every few weeks, it would just open on its own. Teachers would brush it off, saying it was just old hinges or air pressure. But we all knew better than that. People whispered about a kid who had disappeared decades ago, right after the detention in that very basement. Some said the locker belonged to him. Others said you could still hear knocking from the inside of the locker if you get too close. I didn't believe any of it until I got detention. It was a stupid reason. I was late too many times, so they sent me down there to clean, alone. The second I stepped into that basement, it felt colder. Not like regular cold, deep, bone-aching cold. The kind that made your breath feel heavy. The fluorescent lights buzzed weakly, barely holding on. And then, as I turned the corner, I saw it. Locker number 193. Wide open. At first, I thought it was empty. When I stepped closer, I saw something inside. A notebook. It looked old, really old. The pages were yellowed, and the cover was torn. I reached for it, but the second my fingers touched it, bang! The locker door slammed shut. I jumped back, heart hammering, but before I could react, I heard it. Scraping. From inside the locker. At first, it was like slow fingernails dragging against the metal, but then it got faster, more desperate, like something was trapped inside. And then came the whisper. A voice so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it. Let me out. I ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I was upstairs, gasping for breath. I told the teacher I finished cleaning and got out of there as fast as I could. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about that notebook. Who wrote it? Why was it in that particular locker? The next morning, I got my answer. When I arrived at school, the basement was sealed off, yellow tape. Administration everywhere. They wouldn't tell us why, but by lunch period, the rumors had spread. The janitor had gone down there early in the morning, found locker number 193 wide open, and inside, human bones. No one knows who they belong to. The school never gave an official statement. But one thing's for sure, that locker was never supposed to be opened. I went to West Ridge High, a school that had been around for decades. The hallways smelled like old textbooks, and the walls were covered in fading photos of past graduating classes. Every year, seniors got their portraits taken for the yearbook, and the school kept copies of every edition in the library. I worked there after school, shelving books to make some extra cash. It was quiet, almost too quiet, but I liked the atmosphere. That was until I found his picture. It started when my friend Jesse dared me to find the oldest yearbook in the archives. I reached for a dusty one from 1982, flipping through the pages out of curiosity. The students looked normal, bad haircuts, outdated clothes, until I noticed something strange. One photo didn't belong. Amid the black and white portraits of smiling seniors, there was one face in full color. A boy, sitting stiffly, eyes too wide, mouth slightly open like he had been caught mid-breath. The name underneath was smudged, but I could still make out part of it. Eli something. I laughed, thinking it was some weird printing error. But Jesse wasn't laughing. He was staring at that page, face pale. Dude, he's looking at us. I rolled my eyes until I looked closer. The boy's eyes weren't just staring. They were too sharp, too real. Like he was aware that we were staring at his yearbook photo. We both felt it, that creeping, undeniable feeling of being observed. Jesse slammed the book shut. Nope, we're done. I should have listened. That night, I kept thinking about that face. Something about it didn't feel right. So the next day, I went back to the library, pulled out that same yearbook, and flipped to that page. His picture was gone. I swore it had been there the day before. I even showed Jesse, but now the spot where his photo had been was just a blank square, like he never had existed. I told the librarian, Mrs. Carter, hoping she'd think it was weird too. But when I mentioned the name, her face dropped. You shouldn't be looking for him. Her voice was low, urgent. She grabbed the book and tucked it under her arm. Forget about it. I didn't. That night, I dreamed about the yearbook. In my dream, I was slipping through the pages where the air grew heavy. My fingers trembled as I reached the senior portraits. And there he was, staring at me. Only this time, he was smiling. A wide, stretched grin that wasn't in the original photo. And then his head tilted, just slightly, not frozen, not printed, moving. I woke up gasping, my room ice cold. My window, which I always locked, was wide open. The next day, Jesse wasn't at school. His mom said he had gotten sick overnight. When I tried calling him, his voice went straight to voicemail. That afternoon, I ran to the library, grabbed the oldest yearbook I could find, and flipped through it frantically, page after page, class after class. And then, there he was, Eli. Not in the 1982 yearbook. This one was from 1997. Same face, same two wide eyes, like he had never aged a day. I could not believe what I had just seen. I dropped the book and ran. I didn't go into that library anymore. And Jesse, he never came back to school. His family moved without warning. No forwarding addresses, no goodbyes. But yesterday, in my history class, the teacher handed out old photos for an assignment. One of them was from 2010. And right there, in the back row, was Eli. Still watching, still smiling.